Hi, I'm Liz from Night Owl Crafts Australia, and this is my able assistant, Tosh. Today we're going to be looking at making embellishments for cards using perfect pearls and UTEE. These are some of the embellishments that I have made previously using this technique. This is a coaster that I've made previously using this technique. I've also, using Tim Holtz steel rule dies, made the bird cage and the little bird, some cogs and some leaves. So we'll just run through how this was done. To make most of these embellishments, I just used some card that I cut off the back of a cereal packet. You can use any card for this project, preferably not too thin. I also used this steel rule die from Tim Holtz of the tattered leaves. When you're using the steel rule dies, they're a lot thicker than the wafer thin ones, so you only need the die, a cutting plate, and the material that you're going to cut from. Once you've cut out your piece, you will need to give it a couple of coats of black, and I've used the black gesso, this one from Joe Songes, or you can just use black acrylic paint. So a couple of coats, let it dry, and then we're ready to stamp our image onto the leaf. The image is stamped onto the leaf with Versamark, the clear watermark stamp ink. And I'm going to use this Bear Tree stamp from Stampin Up. Just putting it onto a stamping block, and it will adhere down well. We'll then cover the stamp with the clear ink very liberally. And then stamp it over the leaf, trying to get the trunk roughly where the stem of the leaf is. Give it a good press and a moment for the ink to adhere. It's a very sticky ink, so we'll have to peel off the image. And we're now ready to apply our perfect pearls. Now, when you're using a black background, the interference perfect pearls are the best to use, as they show up best on a black background. You've got a green, a violet, red, or interference blue. For this one I'm going to use the green. Just tap the lid so it settles the powder inside the jar. And then using a brush, we just pick up a little bit of the perfect pearls and pounce it over the leaf. The perfect pearls will adhere wherever the Versamark ink was laid down. Once we've finished applying the perfect pearls, just give it a little bit of a brush off to get rid of the excess. I first learnt this technique watching a video on YouTube that was done by Jules, and she described it as her glittered glass technique. At this point she recommended spraying hairspray over this to ensure that the perfect pearls are not lifted when we go on to the next stage. There's also been suggestions that it should be misted with water to help them adhere. In actual fact, having tried both ways, I've found that you don't need to do anything to it before we apply or go on to the next stage, and the perfect pearls will stay put. So the next stage is to cover this liberally with more of the Versamark ink. Baby wipes are good just to remove the loose perfect pearls so that you don't get them over everything. So the next stage, we use the ink pad and we just apply Versamark all over the leaf, or whatever the image is that you've used, or object. And you can see the green is not coming off onto the ink pad itself. Having liberally covered it, we'll now dip it into some of the UTEE, which is ultra thick embossing enamel, and it is a more coarse granular form of embossing enamel powder, and it looks a little bit like sugar. So best not to leave it in the kitchen where somebody could mistake it for sugar. So we will now dunk the leaf into the UTEE powder. Making sure it's all well covered and tapping off the excess. That will now need to be heated with the heat gun. I've got some long-handled tweezers to stop it from moving as you heat it up. Give the heat gun a little bit of time to warm up. And then heat until the UTEE has all melted over the leaf. If you're very quick, you can dunk it straight back into the UTEE while it's still molten, but I'm not that quick, so we'll just give it a moment to cool, and then I'll apply more of the Versamark and give it a second coat. Avoid touching the surface with your fingers, as you can leave fingerprints while it's still a little bit soft. UTEE, when it's molten, is extremely hot and sticky, so you want to avoid getting it on your hands. So the second coat is going down and back into the UTEE it goes. And looks like it's got a fairly good coat there. And again, we just heat it with the heat gun. So it's still fairly warm. It'll take a little bit of time to fully cool off, but you can probably see the glistening effect that you get. And these make quite attractive additions to any card. I have a couple of examples that I've made. This is a card I've made using the leaf motifs. On one of the leaves I've just used a stamp with printing and done it in the interference red. And on this leaf I used a stamp that had a timber look to it and used a gold perfect pearls and attached them. Again, when you're making your own cards, it's good to, on the back, put something that identifies it as being made by you, especially if you're giving cards to friends, blank cards for them to use. It's good to also decorate the front of the envelope with something that relates to the card that's inside. And here I have used the cutouts from which we made the leaf itself, and now used it as a stencil and applied it onto the envelope and then just inked through the stencil. So nothing goes to waste, and that I can use again and again for other projects. This is another card that I made using the technique with a reindeer, which is from one of Tim Holtz's steel rule dies as well. And I used a background paper from Stampin Up. Used some of the paper that was on the card to coordinate it. And again used my little black cat on the back to identify it as having been made by me. With this coaster, I've just used a timber piece, this one from Kaiserwood, and painted that black and then used an old English print stamp on it. As a coaster, it would work well, except you wouldn't want to put anything very hot on it because it is covered in UTEE, and the UTEE could melt if direct heat is applied to it. So best used for cool drinks in the hotter weather. I hope that you give this technique a go. And I hope that you enjoy the videos that we've been producing and will subscribe to our YouTube channel. This has been Liz and Tosh from Night Owl Crafts Australia, and Tosh is wearing one of her new smart jumpers that her mum bought for her while we were on a trip to Adelaide.